friends and colleagues from around the world, good morning, joining us today for this initiative. And I just wanted to say that listening to Frank last night, listening to colleagues from small island states over the last few weeks and months has been one of the most harrowing experiences in my preparations for this COP26 summit, because it's so obvious that for some people, some communities, some countries at this COP, the transformation that is happening now is not a matter for, as I was saying, it's for our children and our grandchildren. This is something that is an existential threat as we sit here in Glasgow today. Last year, 600 billion tons of ice melted away in Greenland. All that water has to go somewhere. And it's incredibly cruel that these vulnerable, small island states are right in the front line of the loss and damage that is caused by global warming. And of course, as they have said, as our friends have said, they have done virtually nothing to cause the problem. They didn't produce the huge volumes of CO2 that have been pumped into the atmosphere. So I would encourage every country that has benefited from pumping CO2 into the air over the last, whatever it is, 250 years, to join this campaign and to help. And that's why we've made the $100 billion a year commitment, the $100 billion a year commitment, such a crucial part of the UK's presidency and pre-presidency. And I think that we've got to do it. We've got to help people to adapt. We've got to mitigate, but above all, we've got to change the numbers. We've got to bend the curve. We've got to stop this remorseless increase in CO2, because there are people around this room whose populations, vulnerable populations who have done nothing to deserve it, will be in the front line and will suffer catastrophic loss and damage. And by the way, it's those small island states, and frankly, everybody, all those small island states who at Paris managed to change the ambition and ensure that we didn't just commit to keeping the increasing temperatures to 2 degrees, but keep it to 1.5. Because they knew the difference. They knew the difference between 2 and 1.5. And the difference for many people, and I don't want to exaggerate this, but the difference between life as we know it and not being able to continue with life as we know it, between life and death. And that's the reality. And that's the reality we have to face in all sincerity. And I think it was Frank who taught me yesterday something that I didn't know about 1.5. Keep one. There's a very simple way of expressing the desire to keep 1.5 alive and survive at 1.5. That's to make this sign. I think you got that, Tariq. Did you know that, Narendra? You did already. I was a new one on me. Anyway, I want to do it now. Keep 1.5 alive, everybody. Thank you very much. I'm now going to hand over to the initiator of this vital initiative, my friend and colleague Narendra Modi. Narendra, over to you.
Excellencies, infrastructure for resilient island states (ICE) का लॉन्च एक नई आशा जगाता है, नया विश्वास देता है। ये सबसे वनरेबल देशों के लिए कुछ करने का संतोष देता है। मैं इसके लिए कोलिशन फॉर डिजास्टर रेजिलिएंट इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर (CDRI) को बधाई देता हूं। इस महत्वपूर्ण मंच पर मैं ऑस्ट्रेलिया और यूके समेत सभी सहयोगी देशों और विशेषकर मॉरिशस और जमैका समेत छोटे द्वीप समूहों के लीडर्स का स्वागत करता हूं, उन्हें हार्दिक धन्यवाद देता हूं। मैं यूएन सेक्रेटरी जनरल का भी आभार व्यक्त करता हूं कि उन्होंने इस लॉन्च के लिए अपना बहुमूल्य समय दिया। एक्सेलेंसी, पिछले कुछ दशकों ने सिद्ध किया है कि क्लाइमेट चेंज के प्रकोप से कोई भी अछूता नहीं है, चाहे वो विकसित देश हो या फिर प्राकृतिक संसाधनों से धनी देशों, सभी के लिए ये बहुत बड़ा खतरा है। लेकिन इसमें भी क्लाइमेट चेंज से सबसे अधिक खतरा स्मॉल आइलैंड डेवलपिंग स्टेट्स सीड्स को है। ये उनके लिए जीवन मृत्यु की बात है, ये उनके अस्तित्व के लिए चुनौती है। क्लाइमेट चेंज की वजह से आई आपदाएं उनके लिए सचमुच प्रलय का रूप ले सकती हैं। ऐसे देशों के क्लाइमेट चेंज न सिर्फ उनके जीवन की सुरक्षा के लिए बल्कि उनकी अर्थव्यवस्था के लिए भी बड़ी चुनौती है। ऐसे देश टूरिज्म पर बहुत निर्भर हैं, लेकिन प्राकृतिक आपदाओं के चलते टूरिस्ट भी उनके पास आने से घबराते हैं। फ्रेंड, वैसे तो सीड्स देश सदियों से नेचर के साथ समन्वय में जीते रहे हैं। वे प्रकृति के स्वाभाविक साइकिल के साथ एडप्ट करना जानते हैं, लेकिन पिछले कई दशकों में हुई स्वार्थपूर्ण व्यवहार की वजह से प्रकृति का जो अस्वाभाविक रूप सामने आया है, उसका परिणाम आज निर्दोष स्मॉल आइलैंड स्टेट्स झेल रहे हैं। और इसलिए मेरे लिए CDRI या आइरिस सिर्फ एक इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर की बात नहीं है, बल्कि ये मानव कल्याण के अत्यंत संवेदनशील दायित्व का हिस्सा है। ये मानव जाति के प्रति हम सभी की कलेक्टिव जिम्मेदारी है। ये एक तरह से हमारे पापों का साझा प्रायश्चित भी है। फ्रेंड, CDRI किसी सेमिनार से निकली कल्पना नहीं है, बल्कि CDRI का जन्म बरसों के मंथन और अनुभव का परिणाम है। छोटे द्वीप देशों पर मंडरा रहे क्लाइमेट चेंज के खतरे को भांपते हुए भारत ने पैसिफिक आइलैंड और कैरिकॉम देशों के साथ सहयोग के लिए विशेष व्यवस्थाएं बनाई। हमने उनके नागरिकों को 16 तकनीकों में ट्रेन किया, वहां इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर के विकास के लिए निरंतर योगदान दिया। इस कड़ी में आज इस प्लेटफॉर्म पर मैं भारत की ओर से एक और नई पहल की घोषणा कर रहा हूं। भारत की स्पेस एजेंसी इसरो सीड्स के लिए एक स्पेशल डेटा विंडो को निर्माण करेगी। इससे सीड्स को सैटेलाइट के माध्यम से साइक्लोन, कोरल रीफ मॉनिटरिंग, कोस्टलाइन मॉनिटरिंग आदि के बारे में टाइमली जानकारी मिलती रहेगी। फ्रेंड्स, आइरिस के साकार करने में CDRI और सीड्स दोनों ने मिलकर काम किया है। ये को क्रिएशन और को बेनिफिट्स का अच्छा उदाहरण है। इसलिए मैं आज आइरिस के लॉन्च को बहुत अहम मानता हूं। आइरिस के माध्यम से सीड्स को टेक्नोलॉजी, फाइनेंस, जरूरी जानकारी तेजी से मोबिलाइज करने में आसानी होगी। स्मॉल आइलैंड स्टेट्स के क्वालिटी इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर को प्रोत्साहन मिलने से वहां जीवन और आजीविका दोनों को लाभ मिलेगा। मैंने पहले भी कहा है कि दुनिया इन देशों को कम जनसंख्या वाले स्मॉल आइलैंड के रूप में देखती है, लेकिन मैं इन देशों को बड़े सामर्थ्य वाले लार्ज ओशन स्टेट्स के रूप में देखता हूं। जैसे समुद्र से निकले मोतियों की माला सबकी शोभा बढ़ाती है, वैसे ही समुद्र से घिरे सीड्स विश्व की भी शोभा बढ़ाते हैं। मैं आपको विश्वास दिलाता हूं कि भारत इस नई परियोजना को पूरा सहयोग देगा और इसकी सफलता के लिए CDRI अन्य पार्टनर देशों और संयुक्त राष्ट्र के साथ मिलकर काम करेगा। CDRI और सभी छोटे द्वीप समूहों को इस नई पहल के लिए फिर से बधाई और शुभकामनाएं। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
Well, thank you very much, Prime Minister Modi, and thank you for your great friendship to Australia, Narendra, and for inviting us to join you here today at this important forum. Thank you also, Boris, our COP26 commander, not Commander Bond, but Commander Boris, and leading us through this very important few weeks. And I'm particularly pleased to be here, like both of you, with our other island state nations. Australia is also an island state. It's a very big island. It's the biggest island continent in the world, but it does give us, I think, in the Pacific, a very unique perspective, as Frank knows, on the challenges facing island nations all around the world. And what we're speaking about here, of course, to address climate change, you have to reduce emissions, and that is a huge part of the response to climate change, of course. But we also have to adapt to live with the consequences of climate change that is already occurring, that is already built in, that is already going to impact on the lives and livelihoods, particularly of those in island nations all around the world. And we recognise that in Australia, and that's why working with everyone to adapt to climate change and the challenges in particularly that our Pacific family face is something that is very much, in very practical ways, a part of Australia's DNA. If there's anything we know, it's to stick with it and to make a commitment to meet it and to beat it. And as our friends and family in the Pacific know, and in Southeast Asia, we can be relied upon. We're helping our friends in Papua New Guinea build resilient roads, bridges and wharves. We've helped build cyclone-resistant produce markets for the Solomon Islands and Fiji. And last year, our prefabricated schoolrooms in Vanuatu withstood tropical cyclone Harold, giving the community a safe place to shelter, as well as the kids a chance to return to school sooner. Over 70% of our climate finance, and we've just doubled that here at COP26 to $2 billion to take us out to 2025, is focused on adaptation. And a very large proportion of it, as I was able to share with our Pacific nations families yesterday, will be directed to specifically in Pacific Island nation states as part of a direct partnership with them, cutting out all the red tape and just getting the projects like the ones I've been talking about on the ground. The last 8 major disasters in the Pacific alone have wrought more than almost $2 billion worth of damage, so there's a lot more work to be done. The joint initiative we launched today, Iris, lifts our ambition further to ensure the resilience of small island developing states, and through partnerships and expertise to drive even greater investment in quality infrastructure, energy, housing, transport, water, healthcare facilities. And I'm especially pleased to be here with my good friend, Prime Minister Bainimarama, and Prime Minister Juganov and Prime Minister Holness. It's a great pleasure to meet you. Leaders of 3 great small island nations. And I also want to thank, of course, India and the United Kingdom for their leadership of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. And I acknowledge in particular the Quad support, including the US and Japan support, together with India, for the CDRI. I'm proud that Australia has already announced our $10 million commitment towards getting IRIS up and running, and I'm proud to be here to launch it today. All of us are here because we believe in fair and practical action to address climate change. We're here because we're family, particularly amongst our Pacific family, and all of us are here because we want to achieve those outcomes. Look out for another, look out for our mates, as we say in Australia, stick together, and let's get on with it.
Sorry, Scott, can I just add, before we go, Frank, can I just tell you one thing quickly, which I should have said, which I forgot, and unaccountably from my script. The UK is also, of course, contributing financially to IRIS, to infrastructure resilient island states, a point that I would not wish this audience to be in ignorance of. We're stumping up as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellencies, and a very good morning to you all. Excellencies, yesterday marked the start of cyclone season in the South Pacific, a period now defined by record-smashing superstorms that can erase years of infrastructure progress in a matter of hours. I know because I've seen it happen, whether it's storms, floods, or fires, the same hard lessons are being learned around the world. Building to last year's standards is building to lose. The world is warming, the impacts are terrifying, and the standards we build must be defined by and readied for those intensifying risks. It takes resources to build resilience, but we either pay to adapt now or pay a much higher price in the aftermath of climate-driven devastation. By becoming the first developing state to enact a comprehensive climate change act, Fiji will be required to adapt our building codes and standards to the climate reality and be inclusive of our green priorities. But there is a gap, trillions of dollars deep, between what vulnerable nations have and what they need to build resilience to a climate crisis we did next to nothing to cause. The welfare of people, both in developed and developing nations, depends on changes on the way we build and plan. Trillions of dollars may sound insurmountable, but the alternative is unthinkable. Even now, we are seeing what can happen when worsening climate-driven disasters meet outdated infrastructure and transport networks. Unchecked carbon emissions could see the foundation of our interconnected global marketplace fall out from under us. We can only bridge the financing gap between vulnerability and resilience if we fully enlist public and private sector sources of funding. We welcome India's launch of the Infrastructure Resilience Project for small island states. It's a promising start. Prime Minister Modi, sir, thank you. Thank you for your leadership. We trust this initiative will reach well beyond technical assistance and capacity building to unlock trillions in private sector capital. It can do that by de-risking critical investments now that will build resilience for those on the front line of the climate crisis. Fiji's Relocation and Displaced Peoples Trust Fund, which establishes a proven process to move at-risk communities and their infrastructure, is one example of where those funds can make an impact. Of course, the single most important measure we must take to protect our development progress is to drastically curtail the emissions that are changing the climate and forcing this crisis upon us. That is the responsibility of every nation, but the greater burden falls justly on the greatest emitters, if I say. If we fail to dramatically cut emissions, if we fail to move swiftly and immediately to free ourselves of our reliance on fossil fuels, we will fly past the 1.5-degree guardrail towards the levels of warming that totally will upend our understanding of resilience. It is a future that we are gathered here in Glasgow to prevent at all costs. Let's not forget it. Thank you.
Excellencies, friends, allow me to commend and congratulate the conveners of this timely initiative and to thank Prime Minister Modi in particular for his invitation. I well recall the meeting between India and the CARICOM leaders on the margins of the Unga a few years ago, when PM Modi listened to our developmental concerns and pledged his support. In Jamaica, our resilience building efforts will shortly be boosted by a US $1 million grant from India to support the construction of facilities for sustainable agriculture. The initiative being launched today rightly focuses attention on SIDS, as we are on the front line of the climate crisis. As we all know, a single disaster can derail the entire budget of a small island developing state and set its economy back by years, reducing our fiscal space to finance climate adaptation and resilience efforts. Jamaica therefore sees capital investment both as a tool for economic growth enhancement, but also as a tool for climate proofing. It is in this context that we welcome this much needed initiative that reflects our own thinking around the pivotal role played by infrastructure in building resilience. In fact, the government of Jamaica is currently co-hosting the 7th UN Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction in the Americas and the Caribbean under the theme, Building Resilient Economies. Jamaica believes in innovation as part of our national strategy and with development partners and the private sector. Jamaica will become the first country in the world to develop a predictive climate risk assessment planning tool for major infrastructure investments. Let me also share one transformational infrastructure project for which we're seeking support. We have conceptualized a solar pumped hydroelectric storage project, similar to ones that you have done in Australia, utilizing our mountainous topography and abundant sunlight to solve our perennial problems of drought, while at the same time generating hydroelectric power. This would make clean, sustainable use of Jamaica's high concentration of fresh water resources in the north of our country to serve the large population centers and drought-prone agricultural south. In closing, again, I thank the conveners for their leadership in building this critical and practical coalition to advance the development of climate-resilient infrastructure. This is at the heart of building economic resilience in SIDS and a positive and decisive step in ensuring that we keep our commitment for 1.5.
That's it. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Great pleasure in joining you this morning for the launching of the Infrastructure for Resilient Island States by the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Since its inception 2 years ago by Sri Narendra Modi ji, the coalition has grown into a global partnership platform to assist states, big and small, in improving disaster resilience of their infrastructure. Mauritius is proud to associate itself with the launch of IRIS, a SIDS-specific initiative that will undoubtedly help this group of countries to become more resilient, promote inclusive infrastructure, and ultimately achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. SIDS remain in the top list of the current World Risk Report 2021 of countries with high risk indices. Our island is negatively impacted by the effects of climate change. Extreme weather events occur frequently. Flash floods have resulted in loss of lives and caused serious damage to infrastructure. To build resilience, my government has invested massively in adaptation programs. A national flood management program costing 11.7 billion rupees will be implemented. Our National Action Plan 2020-2030 embodies the commitments of Mauritius to the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and supports the implementation of international frameworks such as the Sustainable Development Goals and the SIDS Accelerated Modalities of Action Pathway. In addition, legal and institutional frameworks have been updated to implement disaster reduction strategies and disaster management. I wish to highlight that infrastructure and disaster risk reduction is very high in the adaptation measures that are contained in our reviewed nationally determined contributions. However, access to international financial support remains a critical component for building resilience. The use of the Multi-Dimensional Vulnerability Index, developed by the UNDP earlier this year, is crucial to advancing global understanding of inherent vulnerabilities of the SIDS. By better understanding the existential issues that SIDS face, we are hopeful that innovative mechanisms such as the IRIS will flourish. Coupled with adapted financing, such partnerships would go a long way towards assisting SIDS mitigate their disaster vulnerability and improve the resilience of their infrastructure. Thank you.
Small island developing states or SIDS are home to unique landscapes, vibrant cultures and traditions. However, SIDS also face the highest disaster losses in proportion to their GDP. They face large economic, social and environmental challenges compounded by climate change threatening their very existence. Resilient infrastructure is a key driver in mitigating disaster and climate risks, while also meeting the development aspirations of SIDS. SIDS are already taking actions to implement the Samoa pathway, but this cannot be done alone. There is a need for broader partnerships for resilient island nations. The Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure is a global partnership that aims to build climate and disaster resilience into infrastructure systems to ensure sustainable development.
I would like to say that CDRI has set a challenging and urgent agenda for itself.
The Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. The UK is proud to be its co-chair.
We are all at the front lines of climate-driven disasters, and we all stand our best chance at building resilient infrastructure by working together.
CDRI's Infrastructure for Resilient Island States.
My name is Allegra Stratton. I'm the Prime Minister's spokesperson for COP26. But first of all, to kick things off today, it gives me great pleasure to introduce a video from Blackpink. They're one of the biggest pop acts in the world. They probably need little introduction, but for those of you that haven't heard of them, their videos are seen by billions. They break records on YouTube, and they command one of the largest followings of any artist internationally. Their passionate army of fans are known as Blinks. It might include some of you here, maybe, maybe not. And there's hundreds of millions of them around the globe. When they speak, a generation listens. This is their message to all of you, world leaders here at COP26, and they hope that you bear it in mind during the course of today.
Hi, this is Blackpink. Almost a year ago, at the Climate Ambition Summit, we spoke of our journey to learn more about climate change, because we are convinced that this is the most important issue of our time.
การเปลี่ยนแปลงสภาพภูมิอากาศเป็นเรื่องจริงที่กำลังเกิดขึ้น เราได้เรียนรู้เกี่ยวกับการเปลี่ยนแปลงที่ร้ายแรงต่อธรรมชาติสภาพอากาศทั่วโลกและอากาศที่เราหายใจการเปลี่ยนแปลงที่เรากลัวนั้นกำลังเริ่มที่จะส่งผลกระทบกับโลกของเราแล้ว
We have learned that we must act now, urgently, to prevent much worse.
그래서 오늘 글래스고에서 저희의 메시지를 전하게 되어 매우 자랑스럽습니다. 기후 위기에 대응하기 위해 모인 전 세계 리더님들께 부탁드립니다. 우리의 지구를 지금 또 앞으로도 계속 지킬 수 있도록 꼭 필요한 결정을 내려주세요.
6 years ago in Paris, he pledged to do just that to limit global warming ideally to 1.5 degrees. The recent UN panel on climate change warned that this opportunity may be slipping from our grasp.
หากอุณหภูมิโลกสูงขึ้น 2 องศาจะมีผลกระทบอย่างรุนแรงต่อผู้คนและธรรมชาติในทุกมุมโลก 1 ใน 3 ของประชากรโลกจะต้องประสบกับความร้อนจัดเป็นประจำนำไปสู่ภัยแล้งปัญหาสุขภาพและการเสียชีวิต
Almost all warm water coral reefs would be destroyed, and sea ice would melt and devastate wildlife.
우리는 그런 서술 수 없는 상황이 오는 것을 두고 볼 수만은 없습니다. 무엇보다 우리 모두가 책임 의식을 가지는 것이 중요합니다. 모두가 함께 하지 않으면 기후변화에 대응할 수 없기 때문입니다. 우리가 지금 실천하고
หากพวกเราทุกคนก้าวขึ้นมาด้วยความมุ่งมั่นที่แท้จริง
If you world leaders seize this vital moment at COP26,
We can still realize what was promised in Paris 2015. We can still save our planet. We can still save our future.
as COP26 advocates, we hope you will seize this opportunity. We,
Blackpink,
And Blinks, our fans,
our generation, our world,
will be watching and hoping.
Let's work together for our planet and take climate action in your area.
There you have it, a message from Blackpink, but also their fans, Blink, that they will be watching. No pressure then. But next, it gives me great pleasure to introduce high-level champion Nigel Topping.
Thank you, Allegra. Before we start the high-level segment, I'd like to welcome some leading non-state actor voices on stage to showcase the actions already underway to advance a transformative resilience in vulnerable communities. We're going to hear from Selena Leem, climate warrior and poet from the Marshall Islands, from Jean Leon, the president of the Caribbean Development Bank, and from Brian Moynihan, the CEO of Bank of America, on financing a catalytic transition in small island developing states. And to start, it's my pleasure to introduce Celine Leem, climate warrior and poet from the Marshall Islands. Celine, over to you.
Yagoyangan Gomwaleb, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies, gentlemen, and genders, good morning. As you have recognized, our large ocean nation and the late great Tony de Broom made an outsized contribution to making the Paris Agreement a reality. Here in Glasgow, we expect again for the High Ambition Coalition to ensure that the world delivers fully on the promise of Paris. In the eye of the climate crisis, which affects every aspect of the Marshallese way of life and livelihoods, we must tackle this alongside other challenges like unemployment, poverty, and health concerns. Education and indigenous knowledge are the first step to addressing these challenges. An example of this is through the ZIZ-funded initiative with One Island in Mayal, which uses our traditional canoe designs for developing new forms of sustainable sea transportation. As a youth of the Marshall Islands, I know firsthand the need for collaboration in building resilience and implementing equitable, inclusive, and interconnected climate solutions in small islands. Our government has been spearheading the engagement of youths at every level of decision-making through the creation of the Gwangesh Pledge. I encourage other countries to sign up for this pledge. If the Marshall Islands achieve its goal for 100% renewable energy, it will mean that our families will stop experiencing power outages on a weekly basis and free up government resources for our people's most important needs, like health and education. But to achieve that, communities, organizations, and institutions that need to build their capacity, we must draw on the wisdom of our Pacific Island leaders and share our successes in return. And we need collaboration between island communities, donors, and project developers to build projects that really reflect the priorities of our communities. It is through this type of collaboration that we can make SIDS more resilient to climate change and support all generations of island communities. As our great champion Tony de Broom used to say, the thought of having to give up our islands is repulsive to us. But if we save the Marshall Islands, we will save the world. I would like to now welcome the President of the Caribbean Development Bank, Jean Leon. Como tada.
Thank you, Selena. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Small island developing states are at the forefront of climate action, even while we face some of the worst impacts from sea level rise, storm damage, and loss of coastal ecosystems. For the past 40 years, islands have been battered by natural hazards, yet access to finance remains completely inadequate. To better finance our development needs, we need to address economic recovery, climate action, and human welfare. Partnerships will be critical. The Caribbean Development Bank, along with the Inter-American Development Bank and the Green Climate Fund, therefore proposes the creation of a multi-donor financing facility to spur public and private investment, including in climate solutions and resilient infrastructure and institutions. This will include a framework to measure and adjust finance based on the cost and duration of recovery from natural hazards. This partnership model, which could be emulated in the Pacific, will develop new financial instruments to de-risk and mobilize capital, to leverage public funding to catalyze private financing, direct funding towards resilient mitigation and adaptation projects, and integrate long-term capacity development through committing to specific reforms. This investment vehicle will contribute finance to the estimated $130 billion needed across Caribbean and Pacific seas to achieve 90% renewable energy by 2040. Our islands do not want to stop there. We need to target sustainability, equity, and resilience as we focus on infrastructure, energy systems, institutions, communities, and ecosystems. In addition, another initiative that will mobilize finance in islands for mitigation and adaptation is the Climate Finance Access Network. This initiative is being launched in the Pacific islands of Fiji, Kiribati, Papua New Guinea, Samoa, the Solomon Islands, Tonga, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu, and will accelerate the development of projects and help structure financing for impactful mitigation and adaptation projects. Now, I would like to welcome Brian Monahan, President of Bank of America, to announce exciting action his institution is taking to accelerate actions in SIDS. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Leon. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's an honor to be here on behalf of my 200,000 teammates at Bank of America. Our company is working to help drive the transition to a low-carbon, sustainable future we all want. We have pledged to achieve net zero emissions in our financing, our operations, and our supply chain by 2050. To get there, we'll provide $100 billion per year in financing through 2030, over $1 trillion to the effort. I also have the honor of serving as co-chair to His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales in the Sustainable Markets Initiative, or what we call the SMI. The SMI is a private sector-led effort to accelerate the transition to a low-carbon economy. It's a coalition of the willing, 200 CEOs, to helping mobilize transitional capital for key projects and geographies. One of the areas of focus for the SMI are the small island developing states. Exposure to environmental and social risk factors, as my colleagues have talked about, combined with insufficient access to capital, makes these regions some of the most vulnerable in our world today. Working through the SMI and the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, or GFANZ, Bank of America is deploying its human and financial capital to help these nations to a cleaner, more sustainable future. I'd like to share an example of a project that we're working on right now. This is mobilizing private sector capital in creative ways. We're working with one of the largest clean energy developers in the regions to support the development of a multi-gigawatt pipeline. This project goes across all different types of activity, wind, solar, and EV charging stations to the Caribbean states and Latin America, with a focus on the citizen nations, where approximately 800 megawatts of development capacity has been identified to be deployed. We're making this type of financing diversified across multiple clean technologies and multiple countries, which helps us deliver scale, flexibility, and cost efficiency out of the box. Our aim is to build awareness and momentum behind this and other initiatives which can deepen private sector involvement. The public sector, the MDIs, the DFIs, and the MDBs can all play a role by helping enable the flow of capital. That includes lowering barriers of entry for international developers and financial institutions. At the end of the day, it will take all of us, governments, companies, investors, and consumers, working together so we can benefit from a just transition to a sustainable economy. We have to do this while we afford access to everyone for clean, affordable energy, to maintain economic growth and development during this transition, and this project helps us do that. Bank of America is committed to helping this effort, and we'll hope you will join us in a global effort to make this happen. Thank you, and this concludes our interlude.
Distinguished heads of state and government, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, I now open the joint fourth meeting of the COP26, fourth meeting of CMP 16, and fourth meeting of CMA third. As we continue the national statements, I would like to remind distinguished heads of state and government of the actions in place to ensure effective time management. There is a 3-minute time limit for statements during the high-level segment. Statements should be as concise as possible, noting that full text of the official statements will be made available on the UNFCCC website. And finally, please note that heads of state and government who are not in the plenary at the time for delivery of their statements will be scheduled to speak at the end of all statements of the same category. Allow me to also remind you of the COVID-19 protocols to ensure the health and safety of all participants. In accordance with the UNFCCC COP26 COVID-19 Code of Conduct, participants must wear face coverings except when eating, drinking, sitting in office spaces, meetings, sitting to perform negotiations, or are medically exempt. United Nations guidance and practice recommends face coverings to be surgical or FFP2. Delegates should wear face masks while seated, where social distancing is not possible. As part of the hygiene measures to ensure a safe environment of all participants, statements will be delivered from alternate rostrum. Dear distinguished heads of states and government, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, let us begin. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Umaro Sissoco Embalo, President of Guinea-Bissau. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Muito obrigado. Senhor Primeiro-Ministro do Reino Unido, Boris Johnson, Senhora Nicola Sturgeon, Primeira-Ministra da Escócia, chefes de Estado e chefes de governo. Senhora Lok Sharma, Presidente do COP26, Senhora Patrícia Espinosa, Secretária Executiva da Convenção das 4 Nações Unidas sobre Alterações Climáticas, Senhor Philip Bratt, Lord Provost da cidade de Glasgow, minhas senhoras, meus senhores. A recuperação econômica pós-Covid-19 deve ser socialmente justa, ambientalmente sustentável, resiliente e de neutra em termos de clima para atingir as metas ambiciosas de Acordo de Paris e sobre o novo regime climático da Agenda 2030 das Nações Unidas. Desde Paris, na COP21, em 2015, muitas coisas já mudaram e exigindo mais responsabilidades e compromissos sérios de todos e para juntos enfrentarmos e adaptar resilientemente a essa realidade climáticas socioeconômicos de uma reforma sustentável. Com os nossos desafios globais, a necessidade de aumentarmos as nossas ambições em termos de mitigação de gases com efeito de estufa e promover os dois dos outros pilares, nomeadamente e finanças de adaptação, se tornam ainda mais urgentes. E assim, os países desenvolvidos e as economias desenvolvidas devem liderar este processo, estabelecendo metas claras e ambiciosas para atingir emissões líquidas zero, ou seja, neutralidade carbônica até 2050. Minhas senhoras e meus senhores, gostaria de aproveitar esta importante ocasião em que mais uma vez nos reunimos para repensar o futuro do nosso planeta e da nossa própria existência e para enaltecer que o meu país, Guiné-Bissau, um país altamente ameaçado pela subida do nível do mar, erosão costeira, entre os outros riscos ligados a alterações climáticas e com inúmeras vulnerabilidades extremas por ser um país africano, um país menos avançado e um pequeno estado insular em desenvolvimento, é que participa apenas de forma insignificante nas emissões globais de gases com efeito de estufa. E na sua contribuição nacional, determinada e atualizada, está bem patente o seu compromisso com uma meta quantificada de redução de emissões que cobre os principais setores, ou seja, a agricultura, floresta, nos usos de solo, a fulo, energias e resíduos. E isso acresce uma outra meta ambiciosa de reduções nas emissões de gases com efeito de estufa, ou seja, de menos de 30% até 2030, comparação com o cenário de referência. Ainda nessa senda de combate a alterações climáticas, de a figura importante se referir em um objetivo incondicional com recursos próprios do país, visando a redução das emissões em menos de 10% até 2030, face ao cenário de referência. Minhas senhoras e meus senhores, a crise da pandemia de Covid-19 não deve inviabilizar a agenda do financiamento do clima e para a África. O Fundo Verde, confiável para a adaptação, e assim como a promoção desses três pilares, a ambição de adaptações e finanças se torna ainda mais importante e é necessária uma resposta multilateral, mais gradual e em grande escala para enfrentar a crise climática, tendo o alinhamento do fluxo financeiro no centro das nossas atenções. Devemos chegar a um acordo sobre a aplicação do artigo 6º do Acordo de Paris e sobre uma arquitetura financeira de busca de financiamentos climáticos a longo prazo, sem esquecer de que para melhor implementação do mandato de COP para a agricultura deve-se relembrar da forte ligação da agricultura, finanças para a adaptação. E para tal, devemos sair de Glasgow comprometidos de manter contínuo o engajamento financeiro, principalmente por parte dos maiores emissores, para que cada um possa fazer a sua parte, a fim de garantirmos um planeta mais saudável para as gerações vindouras. E para terminar, reafirmo solenemente o engajamento da Guiné-Bissau no âmbito da Convenção de Quadro das Nações Unidas sobre alterações climáticas e na implementação dos objetivos fixados no Acordo de Paris sobre o novo regime climático, como passo essencial na luta contra as alterações climáticas, de aumentar ambições e ações progressivamente a nível nacional, subnacional e coletiva das futuras contribuições nacionais. Muito obrigado e bem-aja.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Serene Highness Prince Albert II of Monaco. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Mesdames et Messieurs les chefs d'État et de gouvernement, Monsieur le Président de la COP26, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, chers amis. Je suis heureux que cette conférence des partis puisse enfin se tenir après une année et demie d'inquiétude et de report, et que la question de la lutte contre les changements climatiques retrouve sa place dans l'agenda international, une place qui doit être centrale, car notre avenir en dépend. Je ne peux m'empêcher pourtant de ressentir une certaine forme de déception. Ayant le privilège d'être l'un des plus anciens participants à ces réunions et d'avoir par conséquent la mémoire de très nombreuses COP précédentes, je me souviens des constats que nous y avons partagés, des promesses que nous y avons faites, et des espoirs que nous y avons soulevés. Or, je constate aujourd'hui que nous ne sommes pas à la hauteur de ces promesses et de ces espoirs. Nous ne sommes pas à la hauteur des engagements pris en 2015 à Paris lors de la COP21. Nous ne sommes pas à la hauteur du défi climatique. Mais heureusement, il est encore temps d'agir. Il est encore temps de limiter le réchauffement planétaire à 1,5 degré Celsius, un seuil dont le GIEC nous a montré à quel point il constituait une limite. Pour cela, il nous faut absolument finaliser les règles d'application de l'accord de Paris, notamment dans le domaine du marché du carbone et de la clarté des engagements des États. Il est encore temps de développer un autre modèle énergétique, seul à même de garantir notre avenir commun. C'est ce que la principauté de Monaco s'efforce de faire.
The use of coal. But what really matters is the rapid development of clean technologies with private sector investment. And this transformation has become an unparalleled economic opportunity for growth and for job creation. And so we're taking similar steps today to make forest conservation not just right for our planet, but right for our economies too. We know that 80% of tropical deforestation is driven by the global trade in agricultural commodities. So the UK and Indonesia have brought together countries that produce and consume these goods to agree a roadmap for sustainable trade so that we can grow our economies whilst reducing the pressure on our forests. And I'm delighted that this has now been signed by 28 countries, accounting for around 3/4 of global trade in these commodities. And as a result, cocoa farmers in West Africa should receive a better, fairer price for their products in return for protecting their forests. International trade standards should reward producers who shift their production to more sustainable methods, and assisted by new technology, supply chains can and will become ever more transparent. So as consumers, we will all be able to enjoy guilt-free chocolate. I mean, I suppose that's carbon guilt-free, not calorie guilt-free chocolate, safe in the knowledge that we have not just helped to prevent deforestation, but unlocking the opportunities of a sustainable food and land use system worth £4.5 trillion worth of trade by the end of this decade. We also want to mobilize global finance on an unprecedented scale. In the last decade, roughly 40 times more finance flowed into unsustainable land use practices than into forests protection and conservation, while agriculture, forests and other land use receives just 2% of available finance. So, as we sign this declaration today, let's also galvanize a radical shift in public and private finance. Let's channel funds towards securing the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, and shift trillions towards supporting sustainable jobs, so that protecting our forests is not only the right course of action to tackle climate change, but the right course for a more prosperous future for us all. And like the advance of Birnam Wood at the end of Shakespeare's great Scottish tragedy, let's work together, not just to protect the forests, but also to ensure that the forests return. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Prime Minister, for setting the scene for this very ambitious set of commitments that we will have today. And now, can I please turn to President Duque, if you would like to use the lectern?
Good morning, Mr. Prime Minister, President. It's a great honor for me to participate in this very important panel. We're gathered here in Glasgow in the COP26 to discuss the future of the world. And we embrace this discussion also considering that this COP will have a big impact on the biodiversity COP15 that will take place in 2022. Both are intertwined, and the future of biodiversity also depends on what we do here. So we are conscious that the most important thing that we can do in order to avoid a climate disaster is that we accelerate our route to achieve carbon neutrality. But I want to raise today in this panel that it's very important to be carbon neutral, but it's also very important to be nature positive. Carbon neutral and nature positive are two concepts that must be in the minds and hearts of every citizen. I come from a country where 52% of our land is tropical forest. 35% of our land is Amazonic land. And we have 52% of the world's high-altitude ecosystems, better known as páramos. So we come today not with a theoretical approach. We come here with clear commitments. And we decided to sign the Leaders' Pledge for Nature so that by 2030, we will have 30% of our land being declared a protected area. But I must say this today, we're not waiting until 2030. We are today committing ourselves to protect 30% of our territory as a protected area in 2022, because we must act now. We are working to achieve this, also with sound regulation. We approved an anti-deforestation bill that is increasing the punishments for environmental crimes in our country. We've also made the protection of biodiversity one of the most important objectives of our national security strategy. And we launched the Artemis campaign so that all the forces and society all work together to protect biodiversity and to prevent further deforestation. But the most important thing we have also done is that we joined the 1 Trillion Trees Initiative that was launched 2 years ago in Davos. And we committed to plant 180 million trees by August 2022. And ladies and gentlemen, we are going to fulfill that commitment, and we will finish this year with 120 million trees already planted in Colombia. And we also know that the most important challenge we have before us is how do we connect financing with the conservation of these ecosystems. So that's why it's not just to declare 30% of our territory being a protected area, but how we conserve those territories and how do we connect green financing with the protection of these environments. I think this is the most important thing that we have to reflect and be innovative and be collaborative. So my invitation to all of you is that in order to protect the tropical forest and the forest around the world, we need to start paying for environmental services. And we need also to expand our tuition and our pedagogy with the public so that we embrace this ethics of the 21st century, but that every conservated land in the world can also be linked to green financing and being able to compensate this in the carbon market. So, Mr. Prime Minister and President, I'm delighted to be here in this panel, and I want to thank you, Prime Minister Johnson, because the UK has been very supportive of all the efforts in Colombia. Yesterday, we received $33 million that are payment by results in conserving the Amazon. And I want to also praise the work of Minister Goldsmith, because with the United Kingdom, we have been able to work along so that we create a new environment in our country so that the protection of the trees and biodiversity becomes the duty of every citizen. So thank you so much, and I hope that today, with this commitment that we have made clear, Colombia also demonstrates to the world that if a country that has only 0.6% of the world greenhouse gases emissions is making the commitment of protecting 30% of our land in 2022, why don't other countries do the same? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, President Duque, for your incredible remarks.
Thank you.
Very much appreciated. May I please show gratitude for what you have done on the Leaders' Pledge, your pledge on the 120 billion trees, and also bringing in the importance of capital and trade. And that is why I would like to now turn to President Joko Widodo of Indonesia. Indonesia has been a wonderful leader on the forest agenda over recent years, and you are also the co-chair, dear President, of the Forest, Agriculture, Commodities and Trade Dialogue. So please, I hope you will also indicate to us how this is going forward. Welcome.
Yang Mulia Boris Johnson, Yang Mulia Ivan Marquez, Bapak Ibu yang saya hormati. Pada KTT kemarin, saya menyampaikan bahwa sektor kehutanan dan lahan di Indonesia akan mencapai net carbon sink pada tahun 2030. Ini adalah komitmen Indonesia untuk menjadi bagian dari solusi. Dan capaian nyata Indonesia di sektor kehutanan tidak terbantahkan. Pada tahun 2020, tingkat kebakaran hutan di Indonesia diminimalisir hingga 82%. Pada tahun 2019, penurunan emisi dari hutan dan tata guna lahan juga ditekan hingga 40,9% jika dibandingkan tahun 2015. Deforestasi hutan di Indonesia juga mencapai tingkat terendah dalam 20 tahun terakhir. Ini dilakukan saat dunia tahun lalu kehilangan 12% lebih banyak hutan primer dibanding tahun sebelumnya. Dan ketika banyak negara justru mengalami kebakaran hutan dan lahan terbesar sepanjang sejarah. Keberhasilan ini dicapai karena Indonesia menempatkan aksi iklim dalam konteks pembangunan yang berkelanjutan. Dan kebijakan pengelolaan hutan berkelanjutan harus memadukan pertimbangan lingkungan dengan ekonomi dan sosial. Kemitraan dengan masyarakat juga diutamakan. Program perhutanan sosial dibuat agar konservasi hutan disertai terciptanya penghidupan bagi masyarakat sekitar. Hal ini penting karena 34% dari seluruh desa di Indonesia berada di perbatasan atau di dalam hutan kawasan. Jutaan masyarakat Indonesia menggantungkan hidupnya dari sektor kehutanan. Menafikan hal ini bukan saja tidak realistis, namun juga tidak akan sustainable. Bapak Ibu sekalian, perkenankan saya berbagi perspektif menjadikan hutan bagian dari aksi iklim global. Pertama, perhatian kita harus mencakup seluruh jenis ekosistem hutan, tidak hanya hutan tropis, tapi juga hutan iklim sedang dan boreal. Kebakaran hutan misalnya berdampak pada emisi gas rumah kaca dan keanekaragaman hayati apapun jenis ekosistemnya. Terkait pengelolaan hutan, Indonesia juga telah mengubah paradigma dari manajemen produk hutan menjadi manajemen landscape hutan, sehingga pengelolaan area hutan menjadi lebih menyeluruh. Selain itu, Indonesia juga melakukan restorasi ekosistem mangrove, hutan mangrove yang berperan dalam menyerap dan menyimpan karbon. Indonesia memiliki lebih dari 20% total area mangrove dunia, 3,3 juta hektar hutan mangrove di Indonesia, terbesar di dunia. Kedua, mekanisme insentif harus diberikan bagi pengelolaan hutan secara berkelanjutan. Sertifikasi dan standar produksi harus disertai market incentives, sehingga berfungsi mendorong pengelolaan hutan yang berkelanjutan bukan menjadi hambatan perdagangan. Sertifikasi, metodologi, dan standar harus didasarkan pada parameter yang diakui secara multilateral, tidak dipaksakan secara unilateral dan berubah-ubah. Sertifikasi harus berkeadilan sehingga berdampak pada kesejahteraan utamanya para petani kecil. Sertifikasi juga harus mempertimbangkan semua aspek SDGs sehingga pengelolaan hutan sejalan dengan pengentasan kemiskinan dan pemberdayaan masyarakat. Ketiga, mobilisasi dukungan pendanaan dan teknologi bagi negara berkembang. Komitmen harus dilakukan melalui aksi nyata, implementasi nyata, bukan retorika. Memberikan bantuan bukan berarti dapat mendikte, apalagi melanggar hak kedaulatan suatu negara atas wilayahnya. Dukungan harus country-driven, didasarkan pada kebutuhan real negara berkembang pemilik hutan. Bagi Indonesia, dengan atau tanpa dukungan, kami akan terus melangkah maju. Kami kembangkan sumber-sumber pendanaan inovatif, di antaranya pendirian Badan Pengelola Dana Lingkungan Hidup, penerbitan Green Bond, dan suku hijau atau green suku, serta mengembangkan mekanisme nilai ekonomi karbon sebagai insentif bagi pihak swasta dalam mencapai penurunan emisi. Para pemimpin, 90% penduduk dunia yang hidup dalam kemiskinan ekstrim bergantung pada hutan. Penyalahgunaan isu climate change sebagai hambatan perdagangan adalah kesalahan besar. Hal ini akan menggerus trust terhadap kerjasama internasional mengatasi climate change dan malah menghalangi pembangunan berkelanjutan yang justru sangat dibutuhkan. Pengelolaan hutan dalam kerangka pembangunan berkelanjutan menjadi satu-satunya pilihan. Kami siap berbagi pengalaman dan pengetahuan untuk itu. Mari kita kelola hutan yang pro-environment, pro-development, dan people-centered. Ini adalah tujuan utama dari Forest, Agriculture and Commodity Trade Dialogue yang diketuai bersama Indonesia dan Inggris. Sehingga hutan akan menjadi solusi berkelanjutan bagi aksi iklim global. Terima kasih.
Thank you very much, President Jokowi, and in particular also for now launching another key commitment, which is the Forest, Agriculture and Commodity Trade Dialogue Roadmap. 28 countries that have endorsed this roadmap, phenomenal. A new partnership which is revolutionary and covers 75% of the global market. But you also made another reflection which was fundamental, and that was the role of communities and indigenous peoples. Because what we will be seeing today is the variety of commitments that are systemic on trade, on capital flows, and for the first time ever, on the deep protection and allocation of help to indigenous peoples that are the stewards of the forests. So that completes this opening session. I would like to very much thank you, and also thank you, President Duque, and of course, yourself, Prime Minister Johnson, as a host. And we can now leave the session and open up for the rest of today's incredible announcements. Thank you very much. Well done, all of you. Well done. Thank you.